Thank you for joining us. So we'll start a little bit with who we are and who's waffling on at you. So we are the Hog Hospital. We're based in Cheriton Bishop, and we started up officially in 2020. So we currently have capacity for 16 hedgehogs inside in our shed, which is a bit of a glorious name. Because it's been purpose built by my partner's parents for hedgehogs, so we're pretty lucky in that respect. And then outdoors, we have room for 10 hedgehogs. We're in release pens and in the outdoor hutches too. So we operate from our back garden and sometimes kitchen, which my partner's thrilled about. So we operate every day all throughout the year. In a normal year, we've had a small period this year where we've been closed to redo the shed because we didn't get it done in time. But we actually all started in 2015. So there's this little chap down here. He started it all. He was called Womble. So I'm a vet nurse and a vet physio. And when I was training in 2015, this little guy came into the practice where I worked. He needed bringing up. So we did that, and he came home and he lived in my partner's parents' house with us in our bedroom. So small beginnings, not ideal, but yeah, we started off like that. So everyone knows what hedgehogs are. I won't bore you with that, but there's a few things people don't know about them which are quite interesting if you're into hedgehogs like I am. So we all know they're nocturnal. Our hedgehogs in our care, they tend to wake up at fairly consistent times. We normally see them around 8 o'clock at night. Then they'll go back to bed, get back up at midnight, and then sort of 2 a.m., 6 a.m. And that's fairly consistent. I don't know if there's any science behind that at all, but that's what we seem to see. Little known fact is they've actually been around for 15 million years. Well, it's thought. So what we would recognize as a hedgehog has been around for absolutely millennia. Which I thought was quite surprising and also makes it a little bit more sad that they're doing so badly today. They're omnivorous, so everyone knows that they eat slugs and snails, which we'll go into a bit more later, but they actually eat everything. They're really not picky. I thought I'd just add they are non-aggressive, which isn't a technical term at all, but I just thought they are the most placid animals I've ever worked with. So we handle painful ones, stressed ones, and I've never been attacked or bitten. They have some pretty nasty teeth, but they don't choose to use them, which is fortunate for me. And they have a lifespan of about 4 to 6 years if they're lucky. So that's excluding all external factors. They will live to about 6 happily and then die of old age. So I thought this is a pretty nice little poster. I don't know who made it, so I don't know who to credit. It's off Google. But it's a really nice picture showing all the different hedgehogs throughout the world, which is again quite sweet. The top ones are the ones you'd recognize as pet hedgehogs. So a lot of people keep African hedgehogs as pets. So they're the lighter colored ones. But we just see the European hedgehog here. But as I put some pictures up just so you can see they do vary in color quite a lot. And I just put a little x-ray picture there because it's quite sweet. And they're not actually that different from our domestic cats and dogs internally. They're quite similar in a lot of ways. And then just final note, they don't have that many close living relatives. Most people automatically think porcupine, which they're not actually that closely related to. Their closest relative in the UK is a shrew. And then America as a whole, you've got moon rats, which I don't know anything about moon rats, but they are closely related to hedgehogs. That's about all I know. So it's just a little bit about hedgehogs. So UK hedgehogs, they live in hedges. The clue's in the name. They like thick vegetation that they can hide from. There's lots of bugs. But their favourite place to be is our gardens. So our gardens provide a fabulous food source. Often boarders will create good home for them. So most people think you'll find them romping around in fields and forests. Not very often. You'll mostly find most of our hedgehogs come in from Exeter, in the middle of Exeter too. So where we are is where they like to be. This map has just been published by British Hedgehogs. It's showing density of hedgehogs throughout the UK. It was made by people reporting sightings, so it could be argued this is probably a bit of a human population density map. because out here you're not going to get many people tagging hedgehogs, but it gives you a rough idea of what's going on. So what do they eat? This helps us a lot with helping them out in the garden. So actually, when most people think of slugs and snails, they don't like them at all, really. It's kind of a last resort. So their favorite diets are invertebrates, so things like your millipedes, your beetles, crickets, that's their favorite. They'll also eat things like caterpillars and earthworms, a nice staple diet for them. And they'll even sometimes resort to small amphibians like newts and frogs. And if they come across a ground nesting bird with eggs and young, then they will eat that too. Again, they prefer easy food that isn't going to wriggle too much, so they won't go too mad on that. But it is another option for them. I put in a picture of a road because it's slightly prettier than what you could put as an alternative, but they are also carrion. So they do eat roadkill and meat, which most people don't expect, but they do like meat quite a lot. And fallen fruit and veg, so they will eat apples, pumpkins, things like that. It's not good for them. So they're missing the part of the stomach that digests sort of vegetable sugars and things like that. So it can actually make them quite poorly. So again, last resort, they would eat those. So actually, slugs and snails don't really come into it much at all unless they're in trouble. But slugs and snails carry quite a lot of parasites, so it's not ideal for them to be eating them. And in some other countries, apparently they eat snakes too. I don't know. I don't think our British ones eat adders. It's never been seen. But apparently they do have venom resistance, which we're not about to put to the test, so I cannot tell you if that's true or not. So some of you may have seen this poster I put up probably last year, just roughly what they do in a year. So in the spring, they've just woken up from hibernation. They're all a bit dozy. They're all underweight because they've used up their stores over the winter. And this is when in our gardens we can really help them by putting out some food. So your cat biscuits, hedgehog biscuits, cat wet food they really like. That's the ideal time to put out food for them so they can regain that body weight. And it's also in this time that they're going to start finding a nest to do have hoglets, and the mating season will start. So if you want a hog box and you want residents, spring is a good time to do it. So then after that, the females will start having their litters. It says 6 to 7 hoglets here, but more normally it's about 4 to 5 hoglets. In the first few weeks, she will not leave. She will pop out maybe momentarily to get some food and drink, but she won't leave those hoglet sides for a good couple of weeks. And then at about 3 to 4 weeks old, they'll start accompanying her out hunting, and then they leave the nest about 8 weeks old and go off and do their own thing. So then moving into the autumn, the mums start again. They have another litter. So on average, mature females will have 2 litters a year. This is a bit of a problem, and this is where a lot of rescues come in because these babies that are born in the autumn aren't often a good enough weight to survive the winter. So we wouldn't want any hedgehog under 500 grams going out in the winter on its own because they will not have the stores they need to hibernate efficiently. So this is where we see most of our babies is in the autumn, and they have to come in and have B&B for the winter until they're fat enough. And then in the winter, as I said, they start to hibernate. This is a really clever design. Essentially, for them to walk around in the winter, keeping warm and finding very scarce food is just not worth their time. So they're able to fall asleep and they completely drop all metabolic activity so that they don't need to breathe as much, they don't need to digest, their heart slows down, and they can drop their body temperature. So when it's frosty outside, there's sometimes hedgehog's blood can actually crystallize, it's that cold, but they're so efficient at what they do and they use those stores they've got in fat to keep themselves ticking over until the warmer months. So they can lose up to 40% of their body weight, which is why it's so important that they have a good body weight to start with. And they tend to wake up in sort of March time. Down here, we don't really see hibernation until mid to late December. We have really mild winters, so compared to the rest of the country, we have a very short hibernation period, which is good for our hedgehogs, but it's also bad from a point of view of parasites because they don't die off over the winter. So threats to hedgehogs, how we can help as a whole, I guess. So a study that was published recently said that we have lost up to 75% of our rural hedgehogs since 2000. And I think in the urban areas it was 45%, so not as drastic. But that's quite a depressing figure because in 20 years' time we may not have them. So it's important that we do something. So the biggest threats I've tried to sort of depict here. One of them is parasites. That's the thing we see the most in here. So the worms, the fleas, the ticks. Worms don't sound like much of a threat. In our cats and dogs, we just worm them. We don't worry. It's just an inconvenience. But actually, people who have horses and cattle, they are quite dangerous things to have. So in hedgehogs, they can cause blockages in their digestive tract. They can even migrate through to the blood vessels. It's a very nasty business. And they basically eat their host from inside out. So if a hedgehog does have a worm burden, it's still a serious condition. And that they get it from things like eating slugs and snails that are infected themselves. So although it is a natural thing to happen, it is on the increase because of restricted diet. This is just a general image for pesticides. So increased use of pesticides since 2000 has reduced the amount of bugs. It's also, if it transfers from a poisoned bug to the hedgehog, it can cause them problems. But this is generally just depicting general decline of bug life. So their food source is dying off and there's not as much for them to cope with. So that's another reason why it's important for us to help them out. Generic image for people. People on the whole aren't too bad. Hedgehogs are one of the nation's favourite animals. It's more sort of blissful ignorance that harms the hedgehogs from this point of view. So people who follow our Facebook page will see me banging on about DIY hedgehog rescue all the time. Most of the deaths we have come in, well, I'd say about half of all admissions coming in from the public would have been preventable if they'd acted quicker. We have a lot of people that will try and look after them for a few days. And it just, if you find them, they're in a bad way and they need attention. That's the ins and outs of it. So we have had a lot of deaths here alone that have been caused by people meaning well, but just not acting as they should. So that's just a brief bit on people. We could get into that deeper, but I won't. Roads. So in that study I talked about earlier, one of the biggest problems for hedgehog habitats is fragmentation. So a hedgehog can walk up to 5 kilometers a night looking for food. If they're restricted by roads or blockages and fences, that sort of thing, it really restricts how far they can go for that food and they can basically starve, or they resort to the bad foods that we talked about, or they just outpopulate themselves and bloodlines get sketchy and it's just not good news. So one of the biggest things we can do to help is try and bridge these habitats together, and then we can get a lot more movement going. Pets aren't a huge problem. We do get a couple a year from pet wounds, dog bite wounds. A lot of the time, dogs they're not attacking, they're just picking them up, thinking they're a big spiky ball. They generally put them down very fast, but it just causes a bit of damage to the skin. So we do get a few wounds from dogs. And cats won't try and eat hedgehogs, but from what we've seen, they will play with them. So we do get a lot with cat bite injuries and scratches, which would normally be fine, but cats carry quite a lot of bacteria, so the wounds get infected very quickly. So pets on the whole aren't a huge problem, but it's just another risk to add there. And then natural predators, so badgers. This is why you see more in the cities now than you do in rural areas as well, is because out here there are badgers everywhere who will eat hedgehogs without hesitation. They're not worried about the prickles at all. So they're the main threats to hedgehogs that we see at the moment.